Hi everyone, this is audapostrophe. Let's continue our game of Chaos Head Noah running on Nintendo Switch. Oh, I hit start. Oh no. Let's get out of here. No, we're not starting. Can't get out of it either. You have to watch it. Until you can finally get to a place where it allows you to hit the menu button. Yasujiban was finally released from the long task force meeting and should have felt much better. But today things were different. He walked away from the other detectives towards the windows. Or towards the windowsill. Oh, it's interesting. I guess I've never seen it spelled out. Where he called his junior partner. Suwa hadn't shown up for the meeting today. Bon had wanted to skip it too, but it didn't seem fair that Suwa got to. Suwa might not look like it, but he took his work extremely seriously. At least that's what Bon had thought. So he was surprised when Suwa skipped today. He tried to get a hold of him several times, and there had been no answer. Ever since Bon had talked to Momose 2 days ago, he'd had a bad feeling that it wouldn't go away. And things had got even worse today. Not only was Suwa missing, when he brought up the GE rate during the meeting, Mutsunaga had told him he was being ridiculous and needed to stop wasting everyone's time. Please don't let anything else happen. Bon sighed a little as he fanned his face. He heard the call being picked up and Suwa answered. The connection was really bad. Bon wondered if Suwa had gone off somewhere deep in the countryside. Bon yelled. He stopped being able to hear Suwa at all. Instead, there was a small period of nothing but static. Suwa shouldn't have been going off on his own. But Bon had a nasty habit of doing just that. He chuckled. Maybe his bad habits had rubbed off on his junior partner. Bon's eyes went wide. Suddenly, the ground started to shake. The shaking got more and more violent. Bon couldn't even stay standing. He dropped to a crouch to keep from falling over. At first, the other detectives seemed unconcerned, but they soon realized the seriousness of the situation and began to crouch or hide under tables. The clock on the wall, the pens and paper cups on the table, the projector device, one after another they fell to the floor with a crash. The 2 whiteboards in the conference room fell too. It was like a passenger jet that ran into a stream of turbulence. That's how it felt to Bon, like his legs weren't even touching the ground. The shaking was spinning his body left to right. It was probably a 5 or 6 in intensity. Is this the next big one? And now of all times? Then Bon felt a strong shock, like someone punched him in the head. He moaned in pain. No one had physically punched him, it was just an incredible headache. Suddenly a scream filled the conference room. Bon gritted his teeth and looked up. and saw one of the local detectives had his hands pressed up against his head, trembling with pain. Then he fell helplessly to the ground, like a doll dropped by a child. Most of the other detectives were either wincing in pain, their hands against their temples, or holding their heads. What was this headache? He'd never felt anything like it before. Did it have something to do with the earthquake? Bond had no way of knowing. Little by little, the shaking stopped. Bond looked outside, vision blurry. There was a white light everywhere. It was so bright, Bond couldn't keep his eyes open. I opened my eyes, feeling a pain so strong I thought my head would burst. I realized I'd fallen backwards in the middle of the room. I tried to get up, but when I did, the pain in my head spread throughout the rest of my body. I moaned in agony. After 5 minutes or so of writhing on the ground, the pain gradually subsided. I managed to use a bedpost as a support to climb back up. I wiped away the thick sweat on my brow. My room looked like it had been hit by a tornado. All my wives had either toppled over or fallen off their shelf entirely. The bed was now tilted, and my manga and H-game boxes had fallen off it and scattered onto the floor. What had just happened? I'd picked up the phone and then heard Torianse, and then it had turned into what sounded like an ambulance siren. That's right. There had been a buzzer sound, and then the low sound of the earth rumbling, and then it felt like my whole body had boiled and melted. I didn't remember anything that had happened after that. My mind was a total blank. Was this some kind of electromagnetic wave attack by Shogun? Maybe Shogun could do the same thing as that system I'd read about in the patent. The idea terrified me. I looked up at the ceiling, still reeling from my headache. Of course, there was nothing to see. If my mind was being read, it was being read by a satellite high above me. But from what Senna had said before, it sounded like the system in the patent was already in use, and some people were using it for evil. If one of those people was Shogun... No, that was impossible. There was no way that could be true. That frail old man looked like he could die at any moment. There was no way he could have his own orbital satellite, or was he at the center of some big government project? There was no point in starting a delusion and scaring myself to death with it. It was clear something had happened, so I decided to look online to find out what. I crawled towards the computer, trying my best to ignore the pain in my head. I was sure I'd left my computer on. It shouldn't have been displaying the Sedaton screensaver, but instead the screen was black. I set it to go into standby mode automatically, so that shouldn't happen, but my mind was so foggy. My whole body felt frail and weak. It took all my strength just to stand up. I grit my teeth to help with the pain and tried to move the mouse. Nothing. Next, I tried the power button. The hard disk started to whir and click. I slumped into my computer chair with a thud. While I waited for my computer to boot up, I reached out a desperate hand for my phone, which was still lying on the table. I looked at the time.
13時
What time had it been when I got the call? I remembered I was looking at the information on Ayase on Achan. I tried to think of the pain. I tried to think, and the pain just got worse. What time? Think. Remember. That's right. It wasn't even noon yet, which meant
1時間以上も気絶してた
Or had I been sleepwalking and had been wandering off somewhere for the past hour?
僕はもう有病じゃない
I shook my head before my brain could fill itself with more negative thoughts. When I did, the aching in my head made me feel like I would pass out. It was like my brain had been replaced by a lump of lead. I looked over at the PC.
おいマジで
Could it be my hard disk was damaged?
嘘だそんなのありえないあっちゃダメだそんなことになったら全てが終わる
My gigabytes of saved XXX Moe porn. My save data for my H games. My bookmarks for my daily browsing. My schedule that told me when I had to go to school. And more than anything, the most important thing in the world to me. My ESO save data. Was it all gone? I wanted to scream in rage. I wanted to pound my fist into the keyboard. I wanted to kick in the walls. And more than anything, I wanted to see if I could be recovered right this very instant. But my whole body was still heavy and slow, and my head still ached. All I could do was lie back in my chair and bite my lip. It was over. My life was over. The loss of my ESO save data meant my life no longer had any meaning. Nothing mattered anymore. My life was nothing but ash and dust. Somebody just kill me. Zeta looked up from where I was lying sideways on my desk and gave me an angelic smile. Server? Did she mean the game company server? Oh, right. This was something every gamer knew, but I was so out of it I'd forgotten. I felt like I'd found one small sliver of hope amidst the despair. Way to go, my wife. I hadn't made any backups of my pics or MP3s, so I'd have to give up on those. It wasn't ideal, but I didn't have a choice. I still wanted to start reformatting my computer as soon as possible. I needed to see if my ESO data was safe with my own eyes. Of course, for that, I'd need this headache to go away. The pain didn't feel like it was going away anytime soon. The big televisions outside Shibuya Station usually played commercials or promos for famous music artists. Today, however, they were showing a stern-looking newscaster. It was a TV show with the following text at the bottom of the screen. Intensity 5 earthquake hits Shibuya, at least 200 casualties. Earthquakes were nothing special in Japan. There had been several earthquakes around a 5 on the scale, even around Tokyo. But as more information started to come in, it became apparent that the number of casualties was abnormally high. There was a similar earthquake in 2005, and not a single person died. Compared to that, this was almost unbelievable. This was even more true when you consider that it had happened in Shibuya, the center of the NewGen murders. There had been an earthquake 3 months ago in Shibuya too. That one only had been a 3 on the scale, but 8 people had died. Was Shibuya cursed? Many of the people who saw the first reports of the quake thought that even if they didn't say it. But either way, the first special broadcast about the earthquake was ready to go almost as it started. Right now, there wasn't a lot of solid information or clear numbers, but the female newscaster was reading out a script. The Fire and Disaster Management Agency had confirmed at least 31 deaths and is expecting that number to grow even higher. The cause of the deaths is currently unknown. There were also reports of a mysterious white light in Shibuya after the earthquake, a shockwave, and the sky turning white. The cameras at Shibuya Scramble Crossing had seen the light, and the big TVs were showing the footage they'd taken where everything had turned white just after the quake. The white had appeared just as the earthquake did, and at first it was less a white and more of an incredibly intense light. The light covered Shibuya in an instant and was so bright that no one could keep their eyes open. Anyone from the generation that lived through the last war would have immediately thought it was a nuclear weapon. In fact, there were those who'd seen a white mushroom cloud rising hundreds of meters in the sky above Shibuya, but it had dissipated almost instantly. What the light was, what caused it, and what it had to do with the earthquake were, for the moment, a total mystery. The strangest thing was that the white sky had gone back to normal within an hour, and once more a murky blue color lay above the heads of the people in Shibuya. There was a tiny crack, just a few millimeters, in the asphalt around Dogonzaka Hill. There were also small cracks in the walls at some of the mixed-use buildings around Center Street. My headache hadn't gone away. It took around 2 hours to reformat the hard drive. I'd almost passed out several times from the pain. I'd gone to sleep in the middle of something before, but this was my first time really passing out from something. Still, the pain was a lot better than it was 2 hours ago. I drank some soda to quench my thirst and steeled myself to get to work. I put the bag to where it was, giving myself a place to stand on the floor. It was hard, considering how weak I was, but if I didn't clean it up, I wouldn't be able to leave the place. If I was trapped inside and unable to escape during Shogun's next attack, not that I knew for sure that if the earthquake was his doing, I'd be doomed. I needed a way to get out. When my OS was finally back, I headed over to my computer and installed ESO. I tried logging in to Baselard.
やった。やった。ナイトハルトは消えてない。装備とかも全部無事だ。よかった。よかった。
I was so excited that I tried to stand up and raise my fist in the air, but I was too exhausted. Still, I was so happy to see that such an important part of me hadn't disappeared after all. Now then. With that done, it was time to see what had actually happened. Personally, I wanted an apology and compensation from whoever was responsible. It felt like an earthquake, but there were so many things that didn't make sense. I looked to see if Grim was playing, but he wasn't. I went to our usual chat room, though it was harder with my bookmarks gone, and he wasn't there either. What good was he if he wasn't here when I needed him? I ended up checking the top page of Taboo instead. The article read Shibuya casualties over 200. There had been an earthquake, from the look of it. It was a 5 on the scale. There were an awful lot of casualties, though. Supposedly the number was likely to go even higher than 200. There was other stuff, too, about how the sky above Shibuya had temporarily turned white, or a big mushroom cloud above the city, but no one seemed sure about what they had to do with the earthquake. And Atchan was talking about it, too. Most comments were things like, Shibuya again? Or Shibuya screwed. There were videos uploaded, too, and I could see what the cameras in Scramble Crossing had recorded.
これ、地震だけじゃないよね。
I felt an incredible headache when the quake hit. No, it was way worse than just a headache. It felt like my brain was boiling over. And even 2 hours later, there was still an aching pain, and I still felt exhausted.
電子レンジに閉じ込められたら、あんな風になるかもしれない。
If that was the case, maybe my ideas about this being some kind of electromagnetic wave attack from Shogun weren't just delusions. I heard a noise I recognized from my PC. It was the sound of somebody joining the chat room. It might have been Grim. I turned my eyes towards the chat window to ask the details. A scream slipped from my lips. Why would he show up now? Has he been reading my thoughts after all? My hand was still shaking on my mouse. The rest of my body had frozen with fear. Even the pain in my head was gone. I didn't even want to look at the word Shogun, but I couldn't take my eyes off the monitor. I wanted to leave the chat room, but it was like my mind had left my body. I couldn't even move the mouse. I felt the prickling on my neck. I was being watched again. It was the gaze of God. Or maybe it wasn't God, but Shogun, looking at me from satellite orbit. I wanted to run away. But where? He could find me anywhere in Japan. Hey, it's been a while. That was the first thing he said. He was talking like he was greeting an old friend, but I never remembered being his friend. I bit my lip and stared at the characters on the screen. But after he spoke, I found myself unable to move again. I grabbed my phone. It was just past 3 p.m. She might still be in class, but Rimi might be able to help me, believing that was my only choice. I called Rimi's number. It was easy to find because it was one of only a few in my contacts.
助けて、リミ。
Do you hate me?
リミ、早く。出て。
It hurt to breathe. I couldn't think. Rimi wasn't picking up. The phone kept ringing and ringing. Why? Don't you always show up when I'm in trouble? Why aren't you here now? I'm sending you a present. A present? You're sending me another one of those pictures? And this time you're going to make me out to be the NewGen killer, aren't you? No, I'm not the killer. I felt like a fish that had flopped onto the land. I wasn't getting enough oxygen. My head felt like it was full of fuzz. My only hope was Rimi. I gripped the phone tighter, praying and focusing on every sound that came out of the receiver. It picked up.
助けて。
留守番電話サービスにおつなぎします。
I hope you like it. Voicemail? Oh no. I hang up the phone. Disappointed, I wrapped my arms around myself to keep steady. My body had started to shake. I was more afraid of Shogun than I thought I was. Of course I was. He was pretending to be disabled, but he was a murderer who'd killed who'd killed people 5 times. And I was his next target.
助けてよ。
Until now, Rimi would always appear at just the right time, but she hadn't picked up the phone. My eyes fell on the fake D-sword in the corner of the room. I picked it up, clinging to the small hope that it might somehow help. It was just a toy. Ayase had said so, and she'd been sure. But maybe she was wrong. At least I wanted to hope so. If I had a D-sword, I'd be saved. I could even defeat Shogun's attacks. So please. I raised the D-sword. I focused on the cutting edge of the blade. Please, be real. Save me.
ディソード。真の姿を現せ。
I closed my eyes tight and gripped the pommel hard. Silence. I opened my eyes a little. Nothing had changed. It was just a toy.
くそーくそくそくそーこの役立たせ。
I slammed the toy sword into the ground and began to pace around the room. I bit my nails, trying to figure out what to do. But the fear threatened to crush me, and I couldn't think. Whenever I tried, the pain in my head would come back. There was nothing left to do but to go back to the PC. Shogun had already left the chat. The only traces of him were the 4 lines he'd left. I didn't even want to see the words he'd written, so I quickly left the chat room myself. I was still shaking. Shogun was taunting me. What was so fun about stalking me like this? Did this mean that I'd be chosen as the next victim, and Shogun was finally ready to put his plan into action? Or that I was the perfect patsy to take the fall for his murders?
誰か助けて。助けてよ。
I looked to post-awakening Sedaton, pleading for her to save me.
一人は怖いんだ。
I didn't want to be alone. I wanted somebody to be by my side. I wanted somebody to protect me.
そうだ。学校だ。学校へ行けば。
Rimi was there. I couldn't handle being alone and scared anymore. I stripped off the sweatshirt I always wore when I was at home, quickly changed into my uniform and left the base. The cold wind outside made my headache feel a little better. Shibuya seemed more tense than usual. Maybe it was the earthquake. I could hear the sounds of sirens in the distance. When one stopped, another started. I couldn't tell if they were fire trucks or ambulances. Probably both. Yamada Street, just one street over from where I was walking, was at a standstill. Several cars had been in head-on collisions and abandoned where they sat. There was no sign of the drivers. The abandoned cars were blocking the road and causing a traffic jam. The other drivers were furiously banging on their horns. As I slowly and unsteadily walked towards the school, a dog ran past me, howling. It was a chihuahua with bloodshot eyes. Its tiny body was running at full speed, dragging a leash behind it. Drool was pouring from its open mouth. Had it gotten separated from its owner? As I watched it distractedly, I stumbled over something and almost fell. There was a crack in the ground, and that's what I tripped on. Did the earthquake cause it? I stopped and looked up at the sky. There were several clouds now, lazily traveling through the muddy blue sky. Supposedly the sky had gone white like an aurora right after the quake, but there were no traces of that now. This wasn't the Shibuya I knew. I felt really tense and uneasy. It wasn't just the earthquake. It wasn't just the headache. It wasn't just those things. It felt like a terrible urge was going to overcome me at any second. Just walking down the street for some reason made me want to kill someone. By the time I reached the school gate, the terror and fear within me had grown even stronger. I felt so cold that my body wouldn't stop shaking. My headache had come back. I could see a crowd near the third-year students' building. I looked for Mimi there. Strangely, they were all looking up at the school building.
Oh, Taku!
Misumi ran up to me. God, I could ask him where Rimi was.
お前、今日学校来てたんだな。いや、そんな今はどうでもいいから。
He looked pale, and his expression was deadly serious. It was rare to see Misumi so badly shaken. What had happened?
マジで。やばいよな。あれ。
Bad? What was bad?
病気だったんだろ。精神病のことがバレて余計におかしくなっちゃったらしいぜ。さっき飛べるとか言ってたぜ。やべえよ。やばすぎる。俺、人が死ぬとこマジで見てんだけど。きっとグロすぎて最高だぜ。早く落ちてこねえかな。
I could hear voices around me saying those things. Could it be... A terrible thought ran through my mind. I looked up slowly to where the rest of the students were looking. At the edge of the roof was a girl. She was holding the D-sword, just like she had in her concert. She was standing there like she was offering a prayer to God in heaven. It was Ayase Kishimoto.
その体は邪神の影に潜む目には映らない存在。
Ayase Kishimoto was feeling the wind on her body. It was cold, with just the slightest hint of winter. Her expression was pained, and beads of sweat were dripping from her cheeks.
離れようとも離れようとも冷めぬ悪夢は。
Suime's academy roof was surrounded by an almost 2-meter high fence. She was standing on the narrow 30-centimeter space on the outside of it. She'd been there for almost 10 minutes. One more step and she'd fall off a 4-story building. Below her was a crowd of students watching with bated breath.
やがて剣となりてこの身を切り裂くのだろう。
They'd called for the police and an ambulance, but perhaps because of the earthquake a few hours ago, no one had arrived yet. The teachers were running around trying to get mats ready if the worst happened.
無関心という名の盾で戦火を免れる人々。
But Ayase stood tall and still, like the chaos below had nothing to do with her. If anything, it looked like she was deliberately cutting herself off from the world below. Her head was tilted up at the sky, and her eyes were closed. She looked almost like a young priestess praying to her god. Her body was completely motionless in the slight wind on the roof. An impressive feat of balance considering the sword she was carrying was almost her own height.
神聖なる戦場の敵は心の内の悪意なるもの。
The sword, her D-sword, was flashing with a pale light, like it was having trouble breathing. Ayase's own breath seemed to be in sync with the light, and her own breathing was pained. She let out a small, soft whisper.
悪意は時として意志を持ち、そしてその姿を表す。
The words she whispered were quickly drowned out by the wind. Ayase opened her eyes, turning towards the amber-red sky above the Shibuya high-rises.
この世界は悪意の妄想に満ち溢れている。みんな他人の不幸が大好き。目を閉じても耳を塞いでもダメ。昔からずっと 私のそばを離れてくれないわ。
As she whispered, she brought the huge sword to her chest. She embraced it with both arms. Strangely, the sharp-looking blade didn't pierce her skin at all.
帰りたかった。大いなる意志が住むもう一つの世界に。そのために心を切り刻んで全部受け入れたわ。混沌の器としての夢を。
Ayase's expression twisted with sadness. Tears silently fell from her eyes. The wind blew them off her face and into the sky.
だけどグラジオールの帯同が活発化している。もう時間がないのに見つからないのよ。天国の扉も賢者も導き手も七つの神罰も。黒騎士の伝説は本当なの。歌はもうたくさん歌ったわ。それで足りないって言うならね。大いなる意志よ。
Ayase slowly spread out her arms, as if she was trying to embrace the sky, as if showing herself to some god high in his heaven.
私は飛ぶわ。
The sword's pale pulsating grew in intensity. Ayase closed her eyes again. A final tear fell from the corner of her eye.
お願い、この器は差し出すから。魂を連れて行って。
And the girl stepped forward without the slightest hesitation. There was nothing left there to support her body.
帰るべき場所へ。
She felt the cold wind gently blow against her cheek. She looked down beneath her. And saw a floating door rising towards her. Beyond it was the sky she sought. All I could do was watch helplessly. Ayase spread out her hands and slowly stepped off the roof like there was an invisible staircase there. Screams and loud murmurs rose from the crowd of gawkers. No longer supported by anything, she fell, like a puppet with strings cut. Everything was happening in slow motion. Ayase's body fell. It fell so slowly, but there was no stopping it. She was going to die. Ayase was going to die. There was no way I could help her. If she fell from that height, she'd die for sure. The ground below her was solid concrete. Her bones would shatter, her organs would be smashed, her brain and dark red blood would be splashed all over the place. If there was at least a flower bed there, if there was a soft earth instead of concrete, then maybe she'd survive. I didn't want to see anyone die. I tried to close my eyes, and then I felt it, the prickling at the back of my neck. I turned. Nobody was looking at me. Everyone was looking up towards Ayase or down at the ground. Whose eyes are those? I heard a noise. The sound of someone hitting the ground. I'd never heard that sound before. It was less loud than I thought it would be. Misumi was standing next to me, watching in shock. He was looking where Ayase had fallen, but instead of showing fear or sorrow, his expression was one of surprise. It wasn't just Misumi either. The whole crowd of gawking onlookers had fallen silent, like they weren't sure what had just happened. Huh? Alive? Ayase was lying on the ground. Had her bones been shattered? I couldn't tell. Had her organs been smashed? I didn't know. Her brains weren't splattered all over the place. Her dark red blood wasn't anywhere to be seen either. A soft but clearly audible moan escaped her lips. She was alive. She had passed out and wasn't moving at all, but she didn't seem to be injured. The most I could see was a small trickle of blood on her forehead. She had fallen all the way from the top of the roof. But now she was almost unharmed. She was lying on top of the flower bed.
花壇に
Had there been a flower bed there?
予定と結果に大きな違いがあったようだが、
我々は進化への第一歩を踏み出したんですよ。
三桁もの死人が出るなど我々は聞いておらんぞ。
計画に不備があったのかね。
いいえ、お二人にはぜひ人の進化の歴史というものを振り返ってみていただきたいものですね。
進化には多少の犠牲はつきものという点については異論はないよ。
死人のことなどどうでもいい。重要なのは予定と違うということだ。
想定の範囲内ですよ、私の中ではね。
ならばなぜ事前に我々へ連絡せんのだ。情報をコントロールするにはそれなりの下準備が必要なのだぞ。貴様の推挙のために人や金を犠牲にしてきたわけではない。それを忘れるな。
ご安心を。先ほど申しました通り、全ては想定の範囲内。いずれ近いうちに選挙での票集めに苦労することも、強引な勧誘活動を告発される恐れもなくなるでしょう。我々が日本を、いや世界を変える日もじきに。
口を慎め。300人委員会への造反が知れれば我らに待っているのは破滅だけだ。
君の役目は計画通りに事を進めることであって、それ以上でも以下でもないよ。
調整は我々がやる。
承知しています。
それで第二世代についての報告を聞こうか。
お二人にも満足していただける仕上がりですよ。ノア2はね。
I ran at top speed from school to the park. By the time I got there, I was too out of breath to move another inch. My lungs were in desperate need of oxygen. As I gasped for air, I took a quick glance around the park. There was nobody there. The people I was afraid of, Shogun and Yua, were nowhere to be seen. Relieved, I decided to catch my breath. It was almost evening. The sky was slowly shifting from blue to the color of twilight. The park was as calm and quiet as ever, as if all the craziness at school had never happened. In the end, Ayase's jump was treated as an attempted suicide. She was carried off in an ambulance. I had no way of knowing what had happened to her after that. Afterward, I'd given up on trying to find Rimi and ran all the way here instead. I couldn't get what I'd just seen out of my head. When Ayase had jumped, when Ayase had fallen, I was sure she was dead. But she'd survived. I didn't know how, but she'd survived. She was breathing. She hadn't looked injured at all. A fall from that height would have killed anyone, but she had miraculously survived, because she'd fallen right on top of a soft flower bed. But that was impossible. Physically impossible. There had been no flower bed there. Right until the moment she'd hit the ground and had been an asphalt parking lot. A bunch of the teachers' cars had been parked there. So where had that flower bed come from? Did I do that? I remember having a delusion that she might survive if there was a flower bed below. But that didn't mean... Could a delusion that only lasted an instant like that really become reality? Maybe I really did have some kind of special power. I'd already seen something similar happen when Ayase split into two people before. Could I even do something as incredible as making a flower bed appear out of nowhere? Even without a D-sword? And that flower bed was still there after she'd fallen, too. When the teachers had run over to her, they'd left footprints in the dirt. The flowers, I think they were the same flowers as the ones in the courtyard, had snapped at the stems when the EMTs had walked over to them. It was probably still there, too. My delusion had become reality and stayed that way. It hadn't disappeared like the other Ayase. And what's more, everyone had accepted everyone had accepted it as natural. No one had wondered why there was a flower bed there. Had I done that?
Oi!
I heard a sharp voice calling out from behind me. I turned around just in time to see a hand reach out and grab me by the collar. Before I even had time to resist, I was slammed hard into a piece of the playground equipment. It hit my back hard. It hit my back hard I hit my back hard and moaned in pain.
お前だな。あの花壇を作ったの。
It was Senna who'd attacked me out of nowhere. She was yanking my collar hard, too. I couldn't breathe. I tried flailing my arms around, but she didn't let go at all. There was an intense light in her eyes that might have been murderous. I shivered, shaking my head frantically, thinking she was going to kill me.
とぼけるな。
Senna's hot breath tickled my cheek. Her face was so close, I worried she might bite me. Why was this woman so violent and scary? Save me. Somebody save me.
お前は天聖信仰会と関係があるのか。
The cosmic what?
その力を誰から教わった？
Senna's voice sounded tense. I'd never heard her like this before. But I didn't know what she meant. All I could do was frantically shake my head.
あんなのありえない。理想度なしでエラーを現実にするなんて。お前はその力のことを誰に教わったんだ？誰からだ？答えろ！
Nobody had taught me anything. But if anyone had, it was... I couldn't breathe. I was going to suffocate. I was passing out, dying. I couldn't stay awake. Just before I passed out, Senna suddenly let go of me. I collapsed where I stood. I coughed and tried to force as much air into my lungs as I could. What the hell was going on? Was Senna my enemy after all? Was she working with Shogun too? If so, I had to get out of here.
本当に天聖信仰会とは関係ないんだな。
What the hell was the Cosmic Church of Divine Light? I'd never even heard of them. Senna saw my confusion and looked momentarily annoyed, but finally stopped glaring at me. She sighed.
悪かった。関係ないならいい。
She didn't sound apologetic at all as she turned to leave. It looked like she didn't intend to hurt me after all. If that was the case, then... I worked up my courage and spoke. I thought she'd ignore me, but she stopped and turned back. She was still frowning, but at least it looked like she would listen to me.
力って何なの？
Senna knew something. She'd asked if I was the one who'd created the flower bed. Everybody else there ended up thinking that the flower bed had been there from the start, but for some reason, Senna knew differently.
さっきの花壇どうなって？
お前が妄想したんだろ。
My delusion? Yeah, it was, but...
妄想は現実にすることが可能だ。本当じゃないものが景色に紛れ込む。つまり、エラーを現実として認識させる。
でも視界に映すだけじゃそれって幻でしかないよ。
An illusion wasn't real. It didn't exist. If that flower bed was an illusion, Ayase would be dead right now. Ayase had survived because it wasn't an illusion, but a real flower bed.
世界の仕組みは3つの数字で全て説明できる。0と1、そしてマイナス1。ディソードはそのマイナス1を生み出すためのショートカットになる。だがお前はディソードなしでそれをやった。
She was starting to go off the rails again. No, but what Senna was saying wasn't just some girl's crazy ramblings. The VR technology patent was real, at least. Maybe Senna knew something after all.
いいか、これ以上エラーを作るな。それがお前のためだ。それと他にもエラーを見たら教えろ。
Her words sounded like almost like a threat, and then she turned away.
目に見えるものだけを信じられることが、どんなに幸せか。
Senna whispered that, and then this time she left the park. There was silence on the floor of AH Tokyo General Hospital where the psychiatric wards were located. The surgery and emergency wards were supposedly dealing with a rash of unexplained comas that had started to occur after the earthquake. But the psych ward had nothing to do with any of that. If anything, they finished up their outpatient exams a little earlier than scheduled. A few days from now, there might be a flood of people experiencing PTSD from the quake, but for today, at least, there was nothing left for the outpatient staff to do. Hino Hazuki, one of the nurses, had been working here since the last night shift, and belatedly realized she'd barely taken a break the whole time. She was hungry, too. The ward had lost one of its doctors the other day. He'd been murdered horribly in one of the NewGen incidents, and his replacement hadn't come yet, so there weren't enough people. But all that was left for the day were a few minor tasks. She could hand them over to the night staff, and she'd finally be able to go home. She slapped her cheeks with her hands, telling herself that she just had to hang in there a little longer, and began to quickly walk across the lobby. Suddenly she felt a gaze from behind, a prickling at the back of her neck. She shivered. She spun around out of sheer reflux, but there was nothing there but a quiet, empty hallway. Hazuki was startled. The voice had come from completely the opposite of the direction she'd expected. She thought the lobby was empty, but there was one person left. He called out to her when he'd seen her. It was a man with a handsome, if still young face. His pallor was healthy, and he certainly didn't look sick.
あなたは。
ちょっと時間もらっていいすか？
はあ。
どうもっす。
The man gave an embarrassed smile, and then suddenly grabbed her by the arm and pulled her from the lobby towards the stairs. The man, Mamoru Suwa, took out a small black book from his pocket and showed it to her. He flipped it open and showed her his police ID. He stopped next to the stairs and looked around carefully to make sure nobody was nearby.
それで、お話って。
She still had work to do and was feeling a little uneasy. Suwa seemed to realize this, so without wasting any more time, he took out a photo from his pocket and showed it to her.
この少年に見覚えないっすか？
It was a photo of a listless-looking Takumi Nishijo. Because of the nature of her work, Hazuki prided herself on being good with faces, and she nodded without even really thinking about whether it was okay to answer or not.
西条匠。間違いないっすか？
ええ。でも。
Her hesitation was natural. Giving anyone, even the police, information about a patient was strictly against the rules. But, of course, Suwa had known that when he talked to her, his casual attitude suddenly vanished and a serious look appeared on his face. He dropped his voice as he spoke.
頼みがあるんすけど、西条匠のカルテ、こっそり見せてもらえないっすか？
え、そんなの無理です。できません。
とある事件に関わる重要なことなんすよ。
Hazuki wasn't sure what to do. She turned to leave, but Suwa got in front of her and blocked her.
困ります。
迷惑はかけないっす。だから頼みますよ。
Finally, he got on his knees and began to beg.
やめてください。本当に無理なんです。
これ以上犠牲者を出さないためにも。
Alright, why don't we stop it there? This is Audap. You've been watching Chaos Head Noah running on a Nintendo Switch. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you at the next stream.